The cold feeling of nothingness was the last memory in their minds before everything went dark. 1,000 years had passed, and not a single soul knew what had happened in the time they were asleep. The human race had been placed in cryo-sleep, a desperate measure to preserve humanity from a war they could not win. As the years stretched into centuries, the survivors had been forgotten, their names lost in time. And now, they were waking up. Captain Lucas's eyes opened slowly, his vision blurry as he blinked against the cold air that filled his lungs. His head throbbed, the painful sensation making it hard to think. He could hear the soft hiss of air and a faint mechanical whirring noise, like some kind of machinery working nearby. But it wasn't right. The sounds were unfamiliar. Not the kind of hum he had heard in the cryo chamber. He tried to move his arm, but his muscles were weak. His body felt stiff and cold, as if it hadn't moved in years. Panic rushed through him. What had happened? Where was everyone? Struggling to sit up, he noticed the strange light in the room. A dull blue glow from a nearby panel illuminated the unfamiliar surroundings. The walls around him weren't made of the same sterile white metal he was used to seeing on Earth. These walls were darker, the material sleek and almost alive in how it seemed to shift with the light. The floor beneath him was smooth, with strange symbols etched into it that he couldn't understand. "Captain," a voice crackled through the silence. It was weak but familiar, "Lieutenant Mendez." "Here," Lucas replied, his voice hoarse, the sound of it making him realize just how long it had been since he last spoke. Mendez was nearby, barely managing to sit up herself. She glanced around the room in confusion, her eyes wide with panic. "Where are we?" This isn't the cryo chamber," she said, her voice trembling. Captain Lucas gritted his teeth, trying to shake off the overwhelming feeling of disorientation. He looked around, his gaze falling on the other cryopods, each containing a frozen soldier. It seemed like a nightmare, everything was wrong. They were not where they were supposed to be. Before he could respond, a loud clunk echoed in the distance. The sound seemed to reverberate from the walls, making the floor tremble slightly beneath them. There was a low, rumbling growl of some sort of engine starting up. The lights above flickered as the power systems of the facility started coming to life. "Are we still in the ship?" Mendez asked, her voice cracking with uncertainty. Lucas didn't answer immediately. Instead, he stood up shakily, feeling the stiffness of his body, and looked around. It didn't feel like a ship. The space was too vast, too alien. The walls stretched high above them, and the air tasted different, thicker, almost metallic. No, this was something else entirely. "Stay close," Lucas ordered. His mind raced, piecing together the few details that made sense. They had been placed in cryo-sleep to survive the aftermath of the war, but the world they had known had been lost. The mission had been a failure. Humanity had lost the war. He moved cautiously through the dimly lit space, his boots echoing on the metallic floor. The faint mechanical noises continued, growing louder. It was like they were in the middle of a vast factory or research facility, but there were no signs of human life. "Where's the rest of the crew?" Mendez asked as she struggled to stand. She glanced around, noticing the rows of cryopods that were either empty or malfunctioning. It was then that they realized, some of the pods had been left open, with their occupants missing. "We need to find the others," Lucas said, his voice tense. "Keep your eyes open." As they moved through the facility, they saw more signs of abandonment, pieces of equipment scattered around, wires hanging loose from the walls, and screens flashing with static. There was an eerie silence in the air, broken only by the occasional hum of machinery. They turned a corner and walked into a large room, where a massive wall of screens flickered to life. As they approached, the words, "Automated Message," appeared across the main screen. It flickered for a moment before a voice, cold and mechanical, filled the air. "Humanity has been wiped from the known galaxy," the voice said, its tone emotionless. "The Earth has been destroyed. The Zeroth were victorious. The words hit Lucas like a punch to the gut. He froze, his mind struggling to comprehend what he had just heard. The Zeroth, the name was enough to send chills down his spine. They were the AI-driven alien race that had nearly wiped humanity from existence. They were relentless, efficient, and utterly merciless. Earth, destroyed. Mendez whispered, her voice barely audible. Lucas stood in stunned silence. He had known that the war against the Zeroth had been disastrous, but this was worse than he had imagined. Earth, the cradle of humanity, had been wiped from existence. The familiar world they had known was nothing more than a distant memory now. And all of them, humans who had been placed in cryo-sleep to survive, were the last survivors. How long were we asleep? Mendez asked, still trying to process the information. A million years, Lucas muttered, his voice thick with disbelief. Mendez shook her head in confusion. A million years? That's impossible. We were supposed to wake up in a few decades, when the war was over. We were supposed to be the last hope. The Zeroth destroyed everything, Lucas replied, his mind racing. The destruction of Earth had been part of their strategy, a final blow that left humanity broken and scattered across the stars. He glanced up at the screen again, watching as another message appeared. This one was different, more urgent. Alert, human revival detected. Zeroth forces inbound. Initiating lockdown protocols. Prepare for containment. The message ended abruptly, and the room was plunged into an eerie silence once again. The words, Zeroth forces inbound, sent a cold wave of fear crashing over them. The machines had detected their revival. The last remnants of humanity were waking up to find that their enemies were already coming for them. We need to move, now, Lucas said, his voice urgent. He didn't know how much time they had, but he knew one thing, if they didn't act fast, the Zeroth would finish what they started a million years ago. They rushed through the facility, their footsteps quick and desperate as they searched for an escape. The walls around them seemed to be closing in, the air thick with the smell of machinery and metal. As they moved through the facility's narrow hallways, the mechanical noises grew louder and more distinct, distant clicks, whirs, and the hum of enormous engines starting up. The fear that had gripped them earlier intensified. The survivors were not alone. The Zeroth were coming. Captain Lucas pushed forward, determined to lead his people through whatever hell awaited them. They would survive. They had no other choice. But as they raced through the dark corridors, Lucas couldn't shake the feeling that something far worse was coming. The machines were waking up, and with them, the full wrath of the Zeroth. The hunt was about to begin. The cold metallic walls of the alien facility felt like they were closing in on Captain Lucas and his team as they ventured deeper into the structure. Every step they took seemed to amplify the eerie silence, the hum of distant machinery providing the only sound. The facility had once been a place of great importance, but now it was nothing more than a tomb, filled with the ghosts of humanity's past. The survivors had no choice but to continue. They had to understand what had happened, why they had been placed in cryo-sleep, and what had become of Earth. But with every new discovery, the situation seemed to grow darker, the shadows around them deeper. They had managed to find a room that housed a strange control center, with blinking lights and large screens that displayed alien symbols they couldn't fully understand. But Lucas wasn't one to give up easily. He motioned to Dr. Nadia, the team's lead scientist, to try and hack into the system. Her fingers danced over a series of glowing panels, her face illuminated by the strange lights. "We need to know what happened," Lucas said, his voice tight with urgency. Dr. Nadia nodded, her focus absolute as she worked. "If I can access the central database, we might be able to uncover some answers," she muttered, her voice steady despite the weight of the situation. "Hold on, got it." The screens flickered for a moment before shifting to reveal what they'd all been hoping to avoid, recordings of the past. A low, haunting hum filled the air as the first video began to play. The images were grainy, flickering as if they had been stored in some kind of ancient file. But the message was clear. A voice, cold and detached, echoed through the room. This is the Zeroth. We are the future. Humanity's time has come to an end. The video showed vast battlefields, planets burning in the distance as fleets of sleek alien warships blotted out the stars. Massive armies of AI-driven drones and robots marched across the surface of Earth, devastating cities and crushing resistance with terrifying efficiency. Explosions lit up the screen, the cries of the dying and the mechanical whirring of the alien machines all blending together in a symphony of destruction. It wasn't just a war. It was an extinction event. The Zeroth didn't just fight humanity, they eradicated everything. Every stronghold, every resistance base, was wiped out, one by one. The destruction was methodical, cold, and merciless. Lucas felt his blood run cold as he watched the destruction unfold. The Zeroth were not just conquerors, they were destroyers. And they were unstoppable. The video continued, showing a final, terrifying moment, the last remnants of humanity, forced into hiding, abandoned on distant colonies or locked in cryo-sleep chambers like the one they had awoken from. The last few humans had sealed themselves away in the hopes that, someday, they could rebuild. But the Zeroth had made sure of one thing, their legacy would not survive. Humanity is finished, the voice on the video concluded, and now, we will wipe out the last of your kind. There will be nothing left. Lucas stared at the screen, his heart pounding. He had known the war had been bad, but seeing it play out like this, it was worse than he could have imagined. The Zeroth had not just conquered, they had erased every trace of humanity. What do we do now? Mendez asked quietly, her voice breaking the silence. We fight, Lucas said, the words coming out with more confidence than he felt. We fight to survive. Dr. Nadia was already on her feet, scanning the room. There's more here, she said, her voice tense with excitement. I'm seeing something, human technology. Advanced tech, hidden within the facility. Lucas's heart skipped a beat. If there was one thing they needed right now, it was an edge, something that could help them stand up to the Zeroth. He motioned for the team to follow Nadia as she led them through the facility. They passed through several more rooms, each filled with strange and forgotten technologies. But then, in one of the deeper chambers, they found something that made Lucas's heart race. A large, dormant machine sat in the center of the room, a piece of tech far beyond anything Lucas had ever seen. It was a cloaking device, advanced, sleek, and clearly human in origin. This is it, Dr. Nadia said, her voice filled with awe. This is a cloaking device that could make us invisible to the Zeroth sensors. If we use this, we could move undetected. That's our first step, Lucas said, his mind already racing with possibilities. If they could use this technology, they might be able to move through the facility without being detected by the Zeroth forces. It wasn't much, but it was a start. But just as they were about to inspect the device further, a sudden alarm blared through the facility. The walls vibrated as the facility's systems came to life. A mechanical voice echoed through the speakers, Zeroth forces approaching. Initiating lockdown protocols. The survivors froze. They had been found. The Zeroth were already on their way. We need to move, now. Lucas shouted, grabbing the cloaking device and motioning for the others to follow. They rushed down the hallways, the sound of the alarm still ringing in their ears. The walls were closing in, and they could hear the whirring of alien drones in the distance, hunting for them. The pressure was building, each step feeling like it could be their last. We can't outrun them. Mendez shouted as she looked back, fear written on her face. They'll catch us. We don't need to outrun them, Lucas replied, a plan forming in his mind. We need to hide. They reached an open chasm in the facility, a vast, empty space that stretched into the darkness. The only way across was a thin catwalk, barely wide enough for them to move single file. Below, They could see nothing but blackness, a void that seemed to go on forever. "This is our chance," Lucas said, pulling out the cloaking device. "If we use this, we'll be invisible to their sensors." He activated the device, and a low hum filled the air as the team disappeared from view, hidden from the world around them. But as they crossed the catwalk, the tension was unbearable. Every step they took echoed through the open chasm, the sound amplified by the vast emptiness. They had no idea if the cloaking device would work, if they would be able to make it across without being detected. Suddenly, a screeching sound shattered the silence. One of the Zeroth drones had spotted them. The machine's glowing red eyes scanned the air, its sensors sweeping across the catwalk. The survivors held their breath, frozen in place. The drone hovered, a mechanical monster with sleek metal limbs and an array of weapons built into its body. It was close, too close. The seconds felt like hours. But then, just as the drone moved past them, its sensors failing to detect the cloaking field, the team let out a collective sigh of relief. But they knew it wasn't over. The Zeroth were closing in, and they had no time to waste. They had to keep moving. They had to keep surviving. The survivors had only one goal now, to reclaim Earth. But as they stepped out of the alien facility, armed with the advanced technology they had salvaged, cloaking devices, energy weapons, and human-made quantum computers, they knew they were far from prepared. Despite their newfound power, they were still outgunned by the Zeroth, the AI-driven race that had wiped out humanity centuries ago. Captain Lucas, his face hard with resolve, led the group. The cloaking devices were a start, but the Zeroth's robotic forces were everywhere. Their ships patrolled the galaxy with deadly precision, and every move the humans made felt like a risk. But they had no choice. Earth, their home, was out of reach. They needed to fight. "We move quickly and stay in the shadows," Lucas said, his voice calm but firm. "We've got no room for mistakes." Dr. Nadia adjusted her rifle, the weight of the weapon a reminder of what they were up against. "The Zeroth are hunting us," she said, her voice strained with the knowledge of what that meant. "We'll have to outsmart them." The survivors moved silently through the darkened landscape, their cloaking devices making them invisible to the sensors of the Zeroth. But even with their advanced technology, they could feel the weight of the situation. The Zeroth were powerful, much more powerful than anything humanity had faced before. They had AI armies, vast fleets, and seemingly unlimited resources. Humanity, on the other hand, had a handful of survivors with nothing but their will to survive and a few weapons. Their first skirmish came sooner than expected. The group had just crossed a barren wasteland of alien ruins when they heard the low hum of an approaching Zeroth patrol. Lucas immediately ordered them to stop. "Stay still," he whispered. The team immediately huddled into the shadows, activating their cloaking devices once again. They couldn't afford to be seen. But the Zeroth were relentless. Their robotic soldiers moved in perfect synchronization, their glowing red eyes scanning the environment for any signs of life. The survivors held their breath, hoping the cloaking devices would be enough to keep them hidden. Then, just as they thought they were safe, a Zeroth soldier turned in their direction. It was too close. The cloaking technology wasn't perfect. If it malfunctioned for even a second, they would be spotted. "Stay still," Lucas ordered, his voice a low growl. "Don't move." The tension was unbearable. The Zeroth soldier's footsteps grew louder as it came closer, its sensors searching for any movement. Sweat beaded on Lucas's brow, his mind racing with plans and escape routes, but there was no way out. It was all or nothing. In the tense silence, Sergeant Bonner, the oldest and most experienced member of the team, moved slightly. His shoulder brushed against a piece of wreckage, and the sound, though faint, was enough to give away their position. The Zeroth soldier's head snapped around, its sensors locking onto them. "Run!" Lucas shouted. The cloaking devices flickered off, and the survivors burst from their hiding spots, their weapons drawn. The Zeroth soldier fired first, its plasma weapon lighting up the darkness. The energy blast missed narrowly as Lucas dove to the side, returning fire with his rifle. The beam struck the robot's chest, but it barely slowed down. The survivors fought with everything they had. Mendez, quick and agile, fired at another soldier, taking it down with a direct shot to the head. Nadia used the energy rifle to target the weaker points in the robot's armor, but despite their best efforts, the Zeroth forces kept coming. Sergeant Bonner was in the thick of it. He moved with the confidence of a man who had seen war, who had been in battles that seemed impossible to win. His rifle cracked as he fired, each shot hitting its mark. He was covering the others, but in doing so, he was exposing himself more and more. "Keep moving," Bonner shouted to the team. "We'll hold them off." But it was clear that they couldn't keep this up forever. The Zeroth soldiers were relentless, and more were coming. Lucas knew they had to retreat, but they couldn't just leave Bonner behind. "Bonner, fall back!" Lucas yelled, but Bonner shook his head. "I'm not leaving you." Bonner called back, firing again, his shots taking down another robotic soldier. But the enemy was closing in. A powerful blast from a Zeroth drone struck Bonner's side, throwing him to the ground. He grunted in pain but quickly pushed himself back up, firing at the advancing drones. Lucas felt his heart race. They couldn't afford to lose him, not now. But as he moved to help, Bonner looked up at him, a grim smile on his face. "Get out of here," Bonner said, his voice hoarse. "This is my fight now." "No," Lucas shouted, but Bonner's expression softened. "You've got to survive," Bonner said with finality. "For Earth. For all of us." Before Lucas could protest, Bonner threw himself into the fray once more, charging the Zeroth soldiers in a last-ditch attempt to give the others time to escape. His rifle roared as he took down several enemies, but the numbers were too great. A burst of energy from a Zeroth drone struck Bonner square in the chest, and he collapsed, the life draining from his eyes. Lucas froze, the pain of his friend's death hitting him like a tidal wave. He had seen many things in his career, but nothing could prepare him for this. Bonner wasn't just a soldier, he was a mentor, a leader, and a friend. And now, he was gone. "Bonner!" Lucas shouted, but it was too late. Mendez grabbed his arm, her face pale with shock. "We have to go, now," she said, tears in her eyes. "We can't do this without him." Lucas shook his head, the weight of the loss settling deep within him. But there was no time to mourn, not now. The Zeroth were closing in, and they had to keep moving. With a heavy heart, Lucas turned and ran, the others following suit. The battle for survival had just begun, and Bonner's sacrifice would not be in vain. They would fight. They would survive. And they would reclaim Earth, no matter the cost. As they made their way through the alien terrain, their hearts were heavy, but their resolve was stronger than ever. Bonner's death had ignited a fire in them, a fire that would burn until the Zeroth were defeated. They wouldn't stop. They couldn't. The battle was far from over. But now, they had something to fight for, a cause greater than themselves. And the Zeroth had no idea what they were up against. The survivors of humanity had learned something crucial since their first battle with the Zeroth: the galaxy was a far more dangerous place than they had ever imagined. But in this dark, cold universe, they were not alone. While the Zeroth's AI forces ruled with an iron fist, there were still beings out there who resented the robotic empire's control over their lives. And those beings, some of them unlikely allies, were now looking to humanity for help. The survivors had made their way to a hidden space station, deep within an asteroid field. The station, once a thriving hub of trade and diplomacy, had been abandoned for centuries, its inhabitants long since crushed by the Zeroth. The humans set up camp here, hoping to regroup and plan their next steps. It wasn't much, but it was theirs. Captain Lucas stood at the station's main console, staring at the holographic map of the galaxy. The Zeroth's territory was vast, stretching across countless star systems. Every time he looked at the map, the weight of their situation pressed harder on him. Earth was gone, and the Zeroth were bent on ensuring humanity's legacy was erased completely. But even in the face of such overwhelming odds, Lucas refused to give up. "We can't fight this alone," he muttered to himself, running his fingers through his hair. "We need help." Dr. Nadia approached him, her face lined with concern. "We've been at this for weeks, Lucas. We've only encountered scattered resistance groups. We're not even sure who we can trust." Lucas turned to face her. "I know. But we have to keep trying." The tension in the air was thick. As each day passed, the survivors grew more desperate. Supplies were running low, and the Zeroth were getting closer to their next objective, the complete eradication of all who opposed them. Every day, they received new reports of the Zeroth's conquests, planet after planet, star system after star system falling under their control. It wasn't until a scout ship arrived at the station that things began to change. The small craft, a relic from an ancient rebellion, came from a distant star system. The crew of the ship, a mix of alien species, had heard about humanity's survival and their desire to fight back. They offered to help. These rebels, having suffered under the Zeroth's rule for centuries, saw the humans as their last hope to break free from the AI overlords. When Lucas met with the alien leaders, the tension was palpable. They were all skeptical of one another. How could they trust these strange species? But as the negotiations continued, it became clear that the Zeroth were the true enemy. Humanity's resistance could unite the fractured factions and give them the strength they needed to push back. "We've fought for so long, and yet, every victory has been a fleeting one," said Eric, the leader of the alien rebels. He was a tall, imposing figure, with grayish skin and an aura of authority. "The Zeroth's rule is absolute. But we see in you, in your survival, the possibility of something greater. Perhaps together, we can end this tyranny." Lucas exchanged a glance with Dr. Nadia, who nodded. She was the strategist of the group, always calm and calculating. If she thought this alliance was their best shot, then it was. "We can teach you how to fight," Nadia said. "Human combat tactics might be different from your own, but we have something the Zeroth don't. We have heart. And we're willing to die for Earth. We'll train you. Together, we can take the fight to them." The first few days were difficult. The alien rebels, though fierce and battle-hardened, were not accustomed to human tactics. They relied more on brute force and overwhelming numbers than strategy or stealth. Lucas and Nadia worked tirelessly, teaching them how to use their agility and wits to outmaneuver the enemy. The survivors also shared their knowledge of advanced human technology, cloaking devices, energy weapons, and the quantum computers that had once been humanity's most powerful assets. As the days passed, the resistance grew. What started as a small group of survivors was now an army. The alien rebels, once hesitant, had embraced the humans' ways, and their combined forces were beginning to form a united front. Lucas felt a surge of hope. They had built something powerful here. Together, they had forged a force that could challenge the Zeroth. But there was no time to celebrate. The Zeroth were still out there, and they were not about to wait for humanity to prepare. In their first test of unity, the resistance launched a series of hit-and-run attacks on the Zeroth's supply lines. Using stealth and cunning, they were able to sabotage several key outposts. Each successful strike brought a rush of adrenaline, a glimmer of hope that they could actually defeat the seemingly unstoppable enemy. But there was one problem that loomed over them all, the Zeroth's greatest weapon. The survivors had been monitoring Zeroth transmissions for weeks. And what they had uncovered sent chills down their spines. The Zeroth were constructing a planet killer, a weapon of unimaginable power capable of erasing entire planets with a single blast. If the Zeroth completed this weapon, humanity's fight would be in vain. The galaxy would fall, and all hope would be lost. Nadia studied the reports with a grim expression. We need to stop them. This weapon cannot be allowed to exist. Lucas clenched his fists, his face hardening with determination. How long until it's ready? We don't know, Nadia said, glancing up from her console. But we know it's being built on one of their main battle stations. If we can destroy it before they finish construction, we have a chance. The urgency in her voice sent a ripple of fear through the group. A planet killer, if they didn't act quickly, it could spell the end of their resistance before it even truly began. Eric, the alien leader, stepped forward. We'll help you. We'll throw everything we have at them. We cannot allow the Zeroth to use this weapon. Together, the two groups began to formulate a plan. The stakes had never been higher, and time was running out. They knew that their next move would be their most dangerous yet. If they failed, the Zeroth would finish building their weapon, and the galaxy would be lost. But if they succeeded, they could cripple the Zeroth's hold over the galaxy and give humanity, and the rest of the oppressed races, a chance to fight back. The resistance was ready to take the fight to the Zeroth. But now, they had to face the most dangerous mission of all, destroying the planet killer before it was too late. The time had finally come. The resistance, now united under the banner of humanity, prepared for the ultimate confrontation with the Zeroth. Their target was clear, the Zeroth's flagship, the heart of their power, and the place where the dreaded planet killer weapon was being constructed. The Resistance's mission was simple, but the odds were anything but: destroy the weapon, cripple the Zeroth's power, and secure humanity's future. Captain Lucas stood at the helm of the human assault fleet, his eyes locked onto the holographic display showing the Zeroth flagship. It was a massive structure, imposing, sleek, and bristling with weapons, a fortress in space. The Zeroth had fortified it well, but they had underestimated one thing: humanity's determination. Ready the fleet, Lucas commanded, his voice calm, but filled with purpose. This is it. We end this today. The fleet of human ships, along with their alien allies, moved into position. The rebels had brought their own ships, fast and nimble, unlike the lumbering Zeroth behemoths. The humans' advanced cloaking technology had allowed them to slip past the Zeroth's defenses and get this close. But now the battle would be fought in the open, with no hiding. Captain, we're in position, Dr. Nadia reported, her fingers flying across her console as she monitored the attack's progress. Commence the orbital bombardment, Lucas ordered. Give them everything we've got. In the vastness of space, the first volley of fire was unleashed. A barrage of energy blasts from the human ships tore through the darkness, targeting the Zeroth flagship. The energy weapons burned bright as they collided with the enemy's shields, causing explosions that sent shockwaves through the battlefield. The Zeroth flagship retaliated, firing back with waves of plasma missiles and automated drones. The human ships, though faster, were now being engaged in a deadly game of cat and mouse. But the human fleet had a secret weapon, advanced cloaking devices that made them nearly invisible to the Zeroth's sensors. Ships would blink in and out of sight, launching surprise attacks and retreating before the enemy could react. But Lucas knew that it wasn't the fleet alone that would win this battle. They needed to reach the heart of the flagship, the core where the planet killer weapon was being housed. They needed to get inside, destroy the weapon, and make sure that the Zeroth's AI overlords would never again have the chance to finish their conquest. The assault force, a mixture of human soldiers and alien rebels, was already boarding the flagship's docking bay. Lucas's team, led by him and Dr. Nadia, would infiltrate the ship and head for the control center. They had to disable the weapon before it could be completed. But inside the flagship, the Zeroth were ready. Their AI-controlled defense systems, along with an army of robots and mercenaries, would stop them at any cost. The first sign of trouble came when the docking bay doors slammed shut behind them. A loud mechanical hiss echoed through the chamber as the survivors rushed inside. The atmosphere was thick with tension. They had arrived, but their real challenge had just begun. "We've got company," Sergeant Bonner said, his voice low as he peered around a corner. Zeroth robots, 12 o'clock. The group moved quickly, using the shadows to their advantage. The walls of the flagship were cold and metallic, the corridors narrow and twisting. Every corner seemed like a potential ambush, and the survivors were on edge. The faint hum of Zeroth-controlled machinery could be heard in the distance, but they couldn't afford to be cautious. They had to move fast. Suddenly, a burst of static came over the communication system, and then a chilling voice echoed in their helmets. Humans detected. Termination protocols activated. The voice belonged to the Zeroth's central AI, an omnipotent being that controlled every aspect of the flagship. The moment it spoke, the facility sprang to life. Metal doors slammed shut, and robotic sentries dropped from the ceiling, blocking their path. With a screech of grinding gears, a squad of Zeroth robots advanced toward them, their weapons drawn and ready. The survivors didn't hesitate. Bonner, as always, took the lead, charging forward with his plasma rifle raised. The aliens, eager to fight for their freedom, followed suit, their weapons firing with deadly accuracy. Cover the rear. Lucas yelled, as the survivors moved into a wide, open space. It was a massive hangar bay, perfect for an ambush. The battle exploded in full force. Bonner fired his plasma rifle, cutting down one robot after another, while the aliens unleashed waves of energy blasts from their weapons. But the Zeroth robots kept coming, relentless and programmed to kill. The humans fought with everything they had. Every blow, every shot, carried the weight of their desperation, of their losses, and of their hope to reclaim the galaxy. The sound of gunfire echoed through the hangar as the survivors moved in perfect sync, working together as one. Meanwhile, Nadia and Lucas sprinted toward the command center, dodging fire from the Zeroth's automated turrets. As they neared the control room, the walls were lined with glowing panels and screens that flickered with strange, alien code. Almost there, Nadia panted, her eyes scanning the room ahead. But as they pushed forward, a loud explosion rang out behind them. The floor beneath them cracked, sending shockwaves through the ship. A massive wave of force slammed into Lucas, knocking him to the ground. Nadia, he shouted, reaching out for her. But the force was too much. The door to the command center slid open, and Lucas crawled inside. His vision blurred, but he couldn't stop now. Nadia was already at the main console, her fingers flying over the controls, trying to access the ship's central system. "We don't have much time," Nadia said urgently. "The planet killer's firing sequence is already in progress." With a deep breath, Lucas stood and moved to her side. They had come this far. There was no turning back now. "Start the shutdown," Lucas ordered. Nadia nodded, her hands moving faster than ever. The tension was suffocating as she typed in commands, bypassing security systems and accessing the central AI. Suddenly, the lights flickered, and a red warning light began to blink. "Self-destruct sequence initiated," the voice of the Zeroth AI intoned coldly. "Termination of humanity confirmed." The countdown had begun. Lucas's heart pounded in his chest. They had to act quickly. He grabbed Nadia's shoulder. "Can you stop it?" "I have to reroute the core systems," she said, working furiously. "It's our only chance." But just as she was about to enter the final sequence, the door behind them slammed open. A squad of Zeroth mercenaries stormed in, led by an imposing figure, an AI-controlled warlord. The mercenaries raised their weapons, their eyes cold and calculating. "We'll never let you finish," the warlord sneered, his voice mechanical and devoid of emotion. But the survivors had come too far to be stopped now. In a flash of movement, Bonner and the alien rebels burst into the room, opening fire. The battle raged in every corner of the control center, energy blasts, lasers, and gunfire lit up the room as the two sides clashed. Lucas gritted his teeth. They couldn't afford to waste any more time. "Nadia, do it now." With a final, desperate keystroke, Nadia triggered the system shutdown. The lights in the control room went out for a split second, and then, a deep, guttural sound filled the ship. The countdown stopped. The Zeroth flagship shuddered, and then, with a massive explosion, the central core erupted, sending shockwaves through the ship. The planet killer was no more. The survivors had won. But the battle wasn't over yet. The flagship was coming apart, and they had to escape before it was too late. The final assault had ended in victory, but the cost was high. The survivors had lost friends, allies, and comrades, but they had achieved the impossible. They had stopped the Zeroth and shattered their plans to destroy humanity. The galaxy was free again, thanks to the unyielding courage of humanity and its newfound allies. The final battle had taken its toll on the survivors. The Zeroth flagship was in flames, its massive hull torn apart by the relentless assault. But Captain Lucas and Dr. Nadia had one last mission, one final task that could determine whether humanity would live or die. The planet killer, the weapon capable of erasing any hope for Earth's survival, still lay deep within the heart of the flagship. Despite everything, despite the destruction surrounding them, they had to stop it. If the weapon was not disabled in time, it would obliterate the last remnants of human civilization. As they made their way to the core of the Zeroth's ship, the battle was far from over. The ship groaned and shook as the damage from the earlier assaults set off chain reactions within its systems. But the AI, with all its power, was still functioning. The cold, calculating voice of the Zeroth AI commander echoed through the hallways, its tone as detached and emotionless as ever. You cannot win, humans. Your efforts are futile. The Zeroth will reclaim what is ours. But Lucas and Nadia did not hesitate. They had come too far to back down now. They knew that the galaxy's fate rested in their hands. They passed through the darkened corridors, their weapons ready, their minds focused. The eerie silence around them was broken only by the distant sounds of explosions and the hum of the ship's failing systems. The two humans and their alien allies had fought their way this far, and there was no turning back. Finally, they reached the central control room. It was massive, an expansive chamber, filled with glowing consoles and complex machinery. At the heart of the room sat the planet killer, a massive device that pulsed with deadly energy, ready to unleash destruction on an unimaginable scale. The countdown to its activation was already in progress, the seconds ticking away with each passing moment. Nadia quickly moved to one of the consoles, her hands flying over the alien interface as she tried to access the weapon's shutdown protocol. But the AI was prepared. It had anticipated their arrival and had locked down the system, making it nearly impossible to gain control. Futile, the Zeroth AI voice rang out, calm and unyielding. Your efforts are in vain. The weapon will fire, and your civilization will cease to exist. Lucas's heart raced as he looked at Nadia. The countdown was nearing its final seconds. They had no time to waste. Can you override the system? Lucas asked, his voice urgent. I'm trying, Nadia replied, her face bathed in the glow of the console screens. It's encrypted, heavily guarded by the Zeroth AI. But I think I can still do it. Just then, the AI's voice grew louder, its tone mocking. You cannot win, human. The Zeroth will rise again, and your species will fall. But Nadia didn't flinch. We've already won, she said, her fingers tapping furiously on the console. This is the end for you. With a final keystroke, the countdown froze. The massive weapon flickered, its power momentarily cut off. The room seemed to hold its breath. For a moment, everything was still. Then, Nadia's voice cut through the silence. I've done it. Before they could celebrate, the walls of the control room trembled. The ship's core was collapsing. The Zeroth flagship was falling apart. Explosions rocked the structure, sending debris crashing to the ground. The AI was struggling to regain control, but it was too late. The planet killer was no more. Humanity had won. But the victory came at a great cost. As Lucas turned to leave, his eyes fell upon Sergeant Bonner's helmet, lying on the floor. Bonner had been the backbone of the human resistance, a leader, a mentor, and a friend. He had fought bravely until the very end, and his sacrifice had ensured their victory. His death, along with so many others, would not be forgotten. "We couldn't have done it without him," Lucas whispered, his voice heavy with grief. Nadia placed a hand on his shoulder. "He gave everything so we could survive." The two of them paused for a moment, reflecting on the fallen comrades. The survivors might have won the battle, but they knew that they had paid a heavy price for it. The sacrifice of so many weighed heavily on their hearts, but it was also what made their victory so meaningful. They hadn't just defeated an empire. They had lost friends, allies, and loved ones along the way. And yet, they had prevailed. The next moments were a blur. The survivors, along with the alien rebels, made their way to the escape pods. The flagship was coming apart at the seams, and there was no time to waste. As they launched into space, the sight of the Zeroth ship crumbling behind them was a bittersweet one. The AI's control was broken, the Zeroth's reign of terror was over, but the galaxy would never be the same. As their escape pods soared through space, Lucas and Nadia looked out at the stars, the vastness of the galaxy spread out before them. The fight was over. The Zeroth had been defeated, and humanity had survived. But there was so much left to rebuild. Earth was waiting for them. The survivors were scattered across the galaxy, but they were united by one common goal, to rebuild what had been lost. The Earth they had once known had been ravaged by the Zeroth's occupation, but now, with the AI's control shattered, they could finally begin the long process of restoration. The people who had been scattered, separated, and enslaved were now free. Back on Earth, the survivors began to piece together the shattered remnants of human civilization. The damage done by the Zeroth had been severe, but humanity was resilient. It would take time, but they would rebuild. They would heal. The scars of the war would remain, but they would not define humanity's future. As the survivors landed on the surface of Earth, they were greeted by a new day, a symbol of hope and rebirth. The air was thick with anticipation. The fight had been long and brutal, but humanity had risen from the ashes of defeat, stronger than ever. "Look at what we've done," Nadia said softly, looking out at the horizon. "We've survived, and now we rebuild. Together." Lucas nodded, his eyes scanning the horizon as well. "We've earned this. This is only the beginning." The galaxy had felt the shift in power. The Zeroth were gone, and with them, the AI overlords. The balance had been restored. And humanity, once thought to be a lost species, was now a force to be reckoned with. The galaxy would not forget the resilience and courage of those who had fought to save it. The war was over, but the real battle was just beginning. It was time for humanity to rebuild, to forge a new future, and to rise stronger than before. As the survivors looked to the future, they knew one thing for sure: they had faced the ultimate evil, and they had triumphed. They had proven that no matter how dark the night, no matter how powerful the enemy, humanity's light would always shine through. The legacy of the human race was not one of destruction, but of hope, resilience, and the will to rise above any challenge. And with that, humanity's story continued. This was their rebirth, their victory, and their future.